I grew up in a military family, which, as any Barak brat will tell you, means we moved around a few times while I was a kid. The second time was the summer between 7th and 8th grade. And it sucks so much harder than the first. I guess things are easier when you're in single-digit ages. But at that age, moving away from all my friends hit me that much harder. We known each other all throughout elementary school, and then through most of middle school, too. And we were mostly set to all graduate high school together as well. So as you can probably guess, moving across the country and having to start all over again was not my idea of a fun summer. When it finally came time to starting school, I didn't know anyone, while everyone else had known each other for 2 years. Needless to say, I felt like a real outsider. And even worse, I was being treated like one to pick a reason. Kids found a reason not to like me for it. It was a real cliquey 9th grade, and I wasn't getting into any of them anytime soon. And that's why when someone finally did throw me a bone, I was incredibly grateful and relieved. His name was Todd, and he had also been a transfer student just the previous year. He had said he'd been through the same cold shoulder treatment that I had, but that it was cool, because who would want to be friends with people like that? Anyways, Todd seemed to have a reputation as being a weirdo loner type, but people were probably saying that about me too. So it just made sense to hang out with him if he was offering friendship. Not to say he wasn't kind of weird. He really was. He talked about all sorts of crazy grown-up sounding stuff that honestly got really boring sometimes. But he definitely wasn't a loner. They wanted to hang out every chance we got, and as much as we weren't the best of friends. Hanging out with Todd definitely beat being alone all the time. After all, being alone made you a major target for bullies and safety in numbers and all that. At first, hanging out with Todd was just something I did at school, and we never saw each other outside of it. But after a while, Todd asked if I wanted to hang out at a local arcade with him. I always wanted to go to the arcade, but I was scared to go alone. And going with Todd formed the solid friendship in no time at all. I used to get a few bucks from a mom in cash and quarters. But then Todd would always share some of his money too. We used to play that time crisis game, the one two people could play at once, and since it was more fun to play with a partner, he'd always share a couple of bucks with me so I could carry on playing way after I'd normally have just failed. We started hanging out a lot after that, mostly in the arcade. But sometimes in other spots in the same mall. The arcade was in one Saturday while we were getting some lunch at a Burger King. Todd mentioned having another friend in town that he hadn't told me about. Yeah, I correctly assumed that they didn't go to our school. But I also assumed that they'd be around our age and similar in personality to Todd. But then the more I talked to Todd about his friend, the more he sounded kind of off. And then he mentioned how his friend would give him a ride places. And I was like, how old is this kid? Todd's friend wasn't a kid at all. He was 28. And let's talk, thought so. And he had his own house somehow. Not his mom and dad's place where he lived in the basement or whatever. He had his own place. I asked why a guy in his 20s, late 20s, wanted to hang out with a couple of 13-year-old kids. And Todd just told me something along the lines of, I don't know. He's just cool, I guess. Todd then made me promise not to tell anyone what he was about to tell me. And when I did, he leaned across the table and said, he'll give us beer. I never really thought about drinking or something or anything like that before. But when I asked Todd, he told me beer was just about the best thing a person could drink. He said it tasted a little funny at first, but then the more you drink, the better you feel. I knew my dad and uncle enjoyed a few beers whenever he was over, and they'd always seem to laugh a lot whenever they drank, so why not try it for ourselves? The following weekend, we agreed to meet up at the mall, before heading over to this guy's place. His name was Matt. Looking back on it, I don't think I really believed Todd had an older friend like that, especially one who had risked getting into trouble with alarm by giving kids like us beer. But the only way to know if he was lying or not would be to agree to see it for myself. Again, Todd makes me promise to keep the whole thing a secret. But once we met up at the mall, He almost immediately walks me out to a bus stop and we catches the first one that comes along. Todd seemed really excited to introduce me to Matt. And as much as there was still a chance that it was all just a bunch of nonsense, it was looking more and more likely by the second. We get off this bus in this endless identical-looking suburban sprawl of sorts, walk a few minutes, and then we come to this one sketchy-looking house. Rather, wasn't sketchy-looking so much as it just looked like kind of crummy and not as well looked after as the other houses. We walked up the driveway, rang the doorbell, then this guy answers the door. Todd says, "Hey, Matt, is the kid I was telling you about?" I didn't say anything. But I was kind of amazed, like I said, actually thought that he just made this whole thing up, or at the very least exaggerated his friendship with the guy. But nope. He'd been telling the truth the whole time. And he proved that when he casually asked Matt for a beer for me and him, and Matt said, "Sure." We went and sat on the couch in front of the TV, and I remember there being some baseball highlights on or something. Matt then said that he wanted to go take a shower, and we were welcome to make ourselves at home. I thought it was the most disgusting thing I've ever tasted in my entire life, and passing the candidate on for him to finish it. I figured that he'd be happy to have more beers since he clearly enjoyed it so much. But my surprise, he reacted in almost the opposite way. He seemed disappointed. I didn't like it and kept pushing me to give it another try and push past the initial bad taste. Looking back, he was obviously trying to get me drunk. But at the time, I had no idea why he might want to do that. A few minutes go by, and I hear Matt's voice from upstairs calling up for Todd. Todd goes to talk to him for a second, then comes back to ask if I mind being on my own for a while because he has to go help Matt with something. I told him it was fine. But then I might just leave loose all the same to him. I told him the beer had made me feel like I was gonna barf. But really, I was just getting really bad vibes, and I wanted to go home. Matt asked me to stay, then begged me to stay. And I knew something was wrong from the way he was acting. It took me a while. But I managed to get back home by taking buses across town. And when I did, I told my dad about what had happened in Matt's house. I remember choking up and almost crying because I didn't know how to communicate it. But something was very wrong in that place. I just didn't know what I knew. It had something to do with the beers, and I knew it was wrong for us to have been given them. So much as it had made me feel like a tattletale. I told my dad where the house was and we drove over there. And once he was sure of the house, we drive to the nearest payphone and just call the cops and drive back to the house to watch what had happened. Dad wanted to watch the guy getting busted. And I needed to be there to point him out. So we drove back. The cops arrive, they knock on the door. And I kid you not, no one answers. One of the cops then pierced through a crack and one of the curtains, then they both run around back with screamed, "Police, police, stop what you're doing." Don't know what was going on there. But I didn't see Todd at school anymore. In fact, I didn't see him ever again. And I think it truly had something to do with what Matt was doing. And the fact that he was now going to jail for a long, long time. When the craziest events of my childhood occurred not long after I switched elementary schools. My dad ended up quitting his job when I was 9, and we moved across the country so he could set up his own business near San Francisco. Obviously, this meant that I'd been starting at a brand new 3rd grade class, and let me tell you, I was not fond on the idea. I've always been an introverted kind of guy, and my one prevailing memory of childhood is being painfully shy around new people and places. Making friends didn't come as naturally to me as it did to some other kids. So the idea of having to start all over again was something I remember dreading. Anyway, cut to me in this new 3rd grade class full of boisterous 8-9-year-olds who have known each other for years by that point. I remember feeling tense, like anything I did was going to cause everyone to burst out laughing at me because I'd broken some unknowable taboo to them. I spoke to almost no one, tried to remain totally invisible, and waited until the opportunity arose to try and make some friends. Then one day, during an indoor recess, this group of 3 boys I used to start doing karate on the lid of a bug jar. We had these big glass bug jars, and class one that had a bunch of little green bugs in it. I think they were aphids or something, and the other for roly-polies or pill bugs, or whatever you want to call them. On this particular day, one of the jars was empty. So, being the stupid kids that they were, this one group takes off the red plastic lid that had all these tiny holes in it, and they start punching and kicking it while taking turns holding it up. They were clearly trying to do that thing where the kung fu master breaks a brick or something with just one kick or punch. But their low strength and the hardness of the plastic meant that it wasn't even budging. I was just watching them for a while then. One of them notices me watching. And I'll always remember this. He asked me, "Hey, new kid, are you strong?" I just shrugged in reply. Then he invited me over to punch the plastic lid to see if I could break it. I didn't really want to do it. But you already know what I'm about to say. It was a chance to make friends. So if it hurt, it hurt. And it did hurt a whole lot actually. And I didn't even give the thing my hardest punch. I was mainly focused on not accidentally punching the kid's finger as he was trying to hold it up for me, because that would almost certainly ruin my chances of ingratiating myself into their group. The point is, I did it and it kind of worked. The kids seemed impressed at the scratches on my knuckles and how I didn't cry or tell the teacher. They too had little scratches on their fists. So there was a real one of us moment, you know. We kicked and punched it some more, stamped on it a little to see if we could do any damage at all, then left it with little white stress marks on the plastic, not broken but definitely damaged. After that, they let me sit with them. And I knew that I wasn't all the way in there. But the smallest bit of acceptance meant the world to me. I was the happiest I'd been since I found out that we were moving, but not minutes later. All that happiness came crashing down. And the least likely person imaginable was to blame. So I'm sitting there with my potential new friends trying my best to fit in. But meanwhile, our teacher found the damaged plastic lid and found out who did it in the process. How to know if she had spotted us towards the end or if someone had snitched on us. But either way, she figured out that it was us, and she decided to punish us. But then, unlike any other teacher who might put our names on a Nautilus, give us a timeout, or call their parents to complain, this crazy bee decides do something else entirely. She asked to see her hands, and we show her figuring that she's gonna go get the band-aids, or whatever. But instead, I swear to God, this is true. She tells us that the bugs that had been in that jar were poisonous. And because their poison had gotten into our bodies, we were going to get really, really sick. As you can imagine, this put the absolute fear of God into us. And we start panicking and asking if we're going to die. I don't remember the teacher explicitly saying yes at any point. But she sure as hell didn't give us a straight up no. She kept telling us to calm down and that she'd go get the school nurse. But then the meantime, we should. And I'm 100% serious with this. Write letters to our families, just in case anything happened to us. I was 8 years old. And this absolute nutcase made me write a friggin' death letter to my mom and dad. I just remember crying. We all cried. And the teacher was out of the room at this point. So kids are asking us what's up, and we're telling them that we got poisoned, and we might die. I mean, tears were just falling out of her face. So all the other kids are legitimately believing us, and they're freaking out. 2 kids are crying, trying to keep away from us running out of the classroom. It was complete chaos. And all the while me and my new friends are sat there trying to find the words to tell our parents that we're dying. It was wild. And because it happened so long ago, it kind of feels like it happened to someone else. But it did happen. And as you can probably guess, there was some pretty serious consequences. I remember that we were taken to the principal's office where the vice principal calmed us down, gave us some lollipops and told us that we weren't going to die. In fact, we weren't even going to get sick at all. And she was going to get US band-aids for our cuts and scratches. Next thing I know, our parents started arriving to take us home, and I remember my dad being really mad about something. I thought he was just mad at me when they kept telling my parents that I was sorry, but I'll never ever forget this part. As long as I live. We're in the car. My dad looks back at me because he's got his eyes on the road and he's like, "You listen, buddy, we're not mad at you. Mad at your teacher. She told you a lie today and we're very mad about it. Okay?" I didn't feel much better so much as I just felt confused, and after the confusion went away, I got really mad myself. It will surprise absolutely no one that the next day that regular teacher of ours had been replaced by a substitute who was replaced by a permanent teacher in turn by the end of the year. I don't know what happened to that old teacher. But I guess that she ended up moving to another town to get a job someplace else. The whole thing was quite a big scandal from what I've heard, so I wouldn't be surprised if she got hounded out of town for scaring people's kids. Now, it's definitely not the scariest story that you've ever been sent. Like, my life wasn't in danger or anything like that. But to think a teacher would scare a kid like that. That's pretty creepy. If he asked me. I used to go to work at a high school with a severe bullying problem. So severe to psychologists from Stanford came to study it for a semester. It was ingrained, and to make the worst thing I had first-hand experience with was the case of a 15-year-old boy who transferred from a different school right around the start of spring semester. He'd been getting bullied mercilessly, and we knew that he was an at-risk student, so we tried to do the best we could for him. We suspended one of our main culprits and gave another a bunch of detentions to keep them out of the way during opportune times. But we couldn't stop everyone. New kid just wasn't ready for it, and the kids at our school should have no mercy at all. They cracked in about a week. The Monday after he first started, he waits until everyone is in the cafeteria, then walks in, put someone locally got very wet jacket, and then set himself on fire. It wasn't water. It was white and spirit. My co-workers found the bottle outside the cafeteria afterwards. One of the cafeteria ladies rushed in with a fire extinguisher really quick, and I think he only burned for about a matter of seconds. And I remember thinking that it might be okay, but he was not okay. The jacket had melted into his skin, meaning the burns were way worse than they might have been if he'd used a different kind of jacket. I figured he'd pull through, but he died the next morning. School was closed for the whole rest of the week. So the kids didn't find out until the following Monday. But us faculty found out almost right away, and it was on the news not long after we announced the kid's death to the students. They were shocked. And a lot of lip service was paid to change in the school's culture of bullying and fighting. But it was just that, lip service. And nothing was ever really done about it other than give a few special classes on reporting incidents of bullying. Reports went up. But bullying stayed the same. Sometimes I find myself missing being a teacher, especially during the summer. But then I remember how some kids treated each other, and I don't miss it so much anymore. Used to work at a preschool, we had this kid, we'll call him Billy. He was a nice kid and wouldn't hurt a fly, always thinking of others. And then we get this new kid in the group. We'll call him Bobby. Bobby also seems like a nice kid, but he's painfully shy. Billy being Billy, he goes over to befriend Bobby and show them around. They become fast friends, and they start playing together. His mom comes to pick her up, and we're happy to tell her that he's made a friend. Bobby's mom doesn't seem very interested. But whatever. The next day, Billy and Bobby are playing again. They're laughing, swapping toys. Then Billy takes toy from Bobby, and everything changes. Bobby freaks out and starts choking Billy with both hands. You need to appreciate the 4-year-olds don't just choke each other. They pull each other's hair, they hit each other. They throw things at each other. They don't hand choke another kid like they're Homer friggin' Simpson. And that's what we call learned behavior. Meaning he'd seen it someplace, and he'd seen it a lot. It caused a huge drama in the preschool for obvious reasons. But we also discussed Bobby's home life to his mom seemed off, and that's putting it gently. So we decided to ask her when she showed up to take him home. Her first reaction was, "What did he say?" As in? What did Bobby say? We told him he didn't say anything. It's more what he did. She kept apologizing and promising that he wouldn't do it again. But then, in the most delicate way possible, we asked about her home life. She told us to mind her own business and left. We later had to ask Bobby's parents to remove him from our preschool on account of no one was cutting his nails. The final straw was when he ended up modeling another kid, leaving bloody cuts down their faces. I still think about Bobby sometimes. No hope is okay. But I also know that fairy tale endings are sadly very rare. I used to drive a school bus for a living. I get this new kid on the bus, and he's 7. His first ride, he grabs a girl that was getting off the bus from behind and pretends to cut her throat. This finger. Instant front seat, instant right up. I talked to the principal about it. He tells me boys will be boys. And the third day of this kid riding the bus, he finger guns several students in the back of the head, execution style. Not in a fun way either, in a real angry, clearly hateful way. That was a big write-up this time, and again, I take it to the principal. Keep them up front if you need to. He's probably just playing around. I get jealous when I hear about school bus cameras these days, very jealous. You see, the next day he does the exact same thing, but this time, the principal very dismissively tells me to just drop it. Like it was me who was at fault. I wrote up the kid and the mother effing principal. This is when the proverbial crap hit the fan. I get pulled up in front of the district transport director, as in my boss's boss's boss. I'm warned that I could lose my job if I escalated things, but I was ready to lose it. I wouldn't be able to say I told you, so if he pulled out a real gun one morning, you know. And long story short, there's a compromise. The kid rides the bus, but so does the principal. The first morning, he's on there, sat next to the kid. The kid asks him, "What do you look like on your insides?" They're really close. I hear every word. The principal starts trying to teach the kid biology or something, and the kid doesn't want to hear it. He just wants to know if the principal looked the same on the inside as his hamster did. I'm not even joking. I did everything I could not to slam on the brakes or take my eyes off the road to give the principal a great big "told you so, you mother effer" kind of look. The social worker ends up paying the mom of this. She had a breakdown and says she can't handle it anymore. I know it seems like an understatement at this point. But the kid had problems, big problems, and problems our teachers wouldn't be able to fix. I know he ended up getting transferred to some behavioral school someplace. Not sure where. I hope there's off the bat out of him there, because the thought of all that hate and a grown man, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies. When I was 10, there was this boy who had a crush on me, and not just a boy, this kid was a complete and utter psycho. He had been transferred from another school district for violent behavior, not just a school, a whole district of schools. So as you can imagine, I didn't exactly do a cartwheel when I found out that he liked me. At first, he wasn't strictly bad to me. But he couldn't get over the fact that I didn't want anything to do with him. So after a while of almost non-stop whining, I finally decided to give him the chance. While I wasn't very nice, to be honest, at the beginning of the lunch, I told him that we could be together. Then I went to lunch, and when I got back, I told him that wouldn't work out. I was 10 and I just wanted to get rid of him. And so I didn't realize how horrible I was. The disturbing thing was that when I quote-unquote broke up with him, he tried to choke me with the jump rope. I was talking to my friends, and he came from behind and swung the rope around my neck and started pulling it. I couldn't breathe. But luckily my friends got them off me soon enough. And dear God, was it the most disturbing experience I've ever had with other kids. My 6th grade self remembers vividly watching a classmate's mother burst into the cafeteria one day. She ran straight up to an 8th grade girl eating her lunch, was screaming at her then, before we even had a chance to figure out what was going on. The lady starts dragging the girl by the hair and pounding on her face like she was freaking to beaver or something. We later found out that it was over the girl bullying her son, also a classmate of mine at the time, by teasing him about being a virgin. She had done this on more than one occasion and had apparently been very explicit about it too. From what I'd heard later, one of the nicest lunch aides had ever seen ran over and started restraining this woman mid-frenzy and ended up throwing her out of the cafeteria after quite a struggle. Obviously the woman was arrested and matter of fact was still in the cop vehicle hours later in front of the school building when the school day was over. Kind of crazy story to tell these days. And it's not exactly campfire material. This was back when lockdowns were becoming a big thing. So that made the whole thing super scary to me. I didn't know if this crazy woman had a knife or if she was targeting some random students or just that girl. We all just ran to the edge of the cafeteria, and everyone else, freaking out, made it all that much scarier. This was all in the first week of middle school, too, so everyone was on edge for practically the rest of that entire year. When I started high school, there was this English teacher/football coach who stood out to me immediately, and I'll never forget him as long as I live. He was a Vietnam vet, combat medic big guy too, and said that he was good at it because he was big and strong enough to carry almost anyone in his platoon. He seemed invincible. And we were all kind of scared at him at first, but then realized that he was just a big teddy bear, and he fast became our favorite teacher. Everyone on school knew that he was a Vietnam vet, as he mentioned in passing sometimes, but not in great detail until we were in a few weeks into the semester. I can't quite remember how it came up. But we started talking about the war. And someone asked our teacher what it was like. I remember he leaned back into his chair and just sort of looked at the kid and then the rest of us in the class and asked us, "Do you really want to hear this?" There were a few muted yes from around the room and a few other kids just sort of nodded. He goes on to tell us some super gory story about holding some poor soldier's brains enter something. That sort of thing probably happened, but he wasn't about to share with a bunch of 14-year-olds. Instead, he just told us how unfair war was. He could follow all the rules, be the best soldier, you could be with the shiniest boots and cleanest rifle, and you could still end up dead. It was just random, chaotic. He saw men become the worst versions of themselves. And sometimes they died for exactly nothing. It wasn't so much what he was saying as the way he was saying it. We all watched this big football coach of a man literally shrink before our eyes, less resigned and more like hopeless. There was nothing undoing it all. It was something that he just had to live with. When the bell rang, he composed himself and told us to have a good day. We left, and he never spoke a bit again. I never stood for the Pledge of Allegiance in high school. I don't hate on America or anything. I just thought it was kind of lame, but I didn't his class. That flag was not cheap cloth, and those words were not hollow phrases to him. So out of respect for the people, he tried to say if I stood and did the thing. I still think about him sometimes. And I wonder if he's still around. I hope he is. He deserves to have a very long and happy life for some of the stuff that he's clearly been through. For high school, I went to a tiny school of less than 200 people. I started my sophomore year, there stayed until graduation. One day, we were in band class, which was a small gym building that had been converted so that the rehearsal room was built into it. We couldn't hear the intercom system over the instruments, but my brother got a text from a friend saying, "We're in lockdown. Why are you guys still playing?" The teacher assured us that it was a drill and told us to practice like normal. Minutes later, someone else gets basically the same text. So we start getting scared and taking things more serious. We got into lockdown position, then I felt like something was super off, and then wasn't a drill. I curled into a ball hiding behind some large instrument cases and started texting everyone I knew in the main building, asking as many questions as I could. A friend texted me saying that there were gunshots heard on campus. A few minutes later, she texted again saying that shots had been fired and one student was dead. I remember pushing the cases out of the way and walking into the main class area, but my knees wouldn't stop shaking. All of the other kids were laughing and joking because they thought it was just some drill, and I said this isn't a drill. Gunshots were fired and someone's gone. And it got really quiet. I crawled back behind the instrument cases and texted everyone I knew telling them that I love them and I was so sorry if I never got to see them again. I was texting my now fiancé telling him that I loved him. I'd never felt fear like that before. And then never felt anything like it since I was covering my mouth with my sleeve, preparing myself to hear the gunshots and the sounds my classmates being taken out, telling myself that even if I heard screams, I had to be quiet so that they wouldn't find me. Eventually, the lockdown was over and cops busted into the room. The meanness dumbed down our backpacks and take off our jackets and shoes. And then we were escorted out onto buses by officers with these huge guns. We later found out that it was a student who had just had class with but taking their own lives and the boys' bathroom. And he was only 14. The guilty experience afterwards, knowing that if it had been worse, that my classmates would have died while I was cowering in a closet, really messed with me.